The Golden Bull, Chapter 12. Determined not to be impressed by anything he saw, Jomar threw back his shoulders and stepped into a small, whitewashed room. He looked coolly about him. The workshop was dimly lit by three small, high windows. Two work tables took up most of the space. Jomar thought the small, beehive-shaped furnace on the floor looked like his mother's oven for baking bread. Also on the floor were a blowpipe to get a fire going, a basket of charcoal, a bowl full of water, and a flat stone worn smooth. Various tools of different shapes and sizes hung from hooks on the wall. Some were familiar, but most were strange to him. He pointed to an elegant tool that stood out from the others. "Isn't that the same tool that's carved into brick over your door?" Sita nodded. "They're tongs, mainly used to hold heated gold." Tongs to hold gold! Excited in spite of his resolve, Jomar knew he had entered another world. Something large and slender stood covered with a cotton cloth in one corner, but Jomar's eye was drawn to three small clay bowls that sat on a work table. In them were blue, red, and black stones. He pointed to the blue ones. "A merchant in the bazaar this morning called these lapis lazuli." "Did he?" Sita asked in a skeptical tone. "You can't believe everything you hear in the city. The temple controls the lapis we import to make sacred objects and jewelry for important people. The gems are so costly and difficult to obtain that they are rarely sold on the streets. The beads you saw were probably fakes made of clay and painted blue to look like lapis." Jomar felt like the farm boy he was. Where did the real ones come from? Sita's voice took on a teaching tone as he pointed to the three clay bowls in turn. "Merchants travel over deserts or up snowy mountains to bring back red carnelian, black obsidian, and fine blue lapis. We have no splendid gems or gold, tin, or copper in this land. We lack stone quarries and even timber." "Where did the wood of the great gate of Ur come from?" Jomar asked. "Huge logs from northern mountains are roped together and floated down the river," Sita answered. Jomar thought of the effort that must go into supplying the city with everything it needed or wanted. A merchant's life must be hard. Sita nodded. "Hard and risky. But if a trader returns with valuable goods, he can become rich, build a grand house, own many slaves. But he can lose everything to bandits, including his life. Sometimes the donkeys that pull his caravans die of thirst or exhaustion, or his richly laden boats may overturn in the river or the sea." Sita's eyes clouded over, and he stopped talking. Jomar waited for him to continue. When he didn't, he asked another question. "What does the city trade for these foreign goods?" "Oil and spices, woven cotton and wool, and the tools and weapons we make from imported metal," Sita answered. "But mostly we trade with the surplus grain that's piled up in the temple storehouses." "Surplus grain?" Jomar said, his voice rising. "In this drought, what grain is surplus when those who live in the countryside go hungry?" Sita shook his head. "You're not going to change the way the temple conducts its business. Farmers and merchants must contribute their produce to the temple so that its staff is fed. It's also used for trade." Sita spoke sternly. "The city lives on trade and would wither without it." Jomar was stung by Sita's reproach. He said nothing, but his mind was filled with images of sun-baked barren fields, the bony cow, her hungry calf. Sita picked up a thin rod of gold that was almost as tall as Zephyr. One end of the rod turned up at a sharp angle. "I've just finished this drinking straw for a high-ranking priestess." Jomar took the rod that Sita held out to him. "This is so light." Sita nodded. "Inside is a hollow reed I've covered with gold foil no thicker than a moth's wing. Temple officials like to drink beer together out of a deep urn." He took back the tube and briefly put one end to his mouth. "This reaches below the impurities that form on the surface of the brew." "I thought spitting out bits of barley husks was part of drinking beer," Jomar said. Sita had a hint of a smile on his face. "Important people don't like to spit." Jomar grinned. "How do you get the gold, the gemstones, your tools?"